Hello there, everybody. So today we are going to get into Neo-Confucianism and Buddhism in Song, China, and Tibet. Let's just do it. Let's do it here. Neo-Confucianism. So this is kind of a new take on Confucianism, and in a way, it's just a refocus on Confucianism during this time. Mainly, this is coming from the government, and there's a specific reason. I have here rejection of the divine. The federal government, both under like the Tang and the Song, weren't huge fans of Buddhism and even Taoism to a certain degree. They felt that these were religions that could be challenging the centralized power of the government and were things that they just didn't want. They also saw them as being quote unquote like non-Chinese because they were coming from outside. And they weren't a big fan of this whole idea of worshiping who they saw as like regular people like Lao Tzu and Buddha, is that many would be worshiping them as like gods, and that's just not what they wanted. They wanted to focus on rationalism and ethics and order and stuff like that, and the core traditional ideas of Confucius, which of course we looked at in our Chinese religions video. And if you're new to the channel, feel free to look that one up as well. So the two guys that I like to bring up here, at least where we get a lot of the scholarship from, are Zhou Dunyi, who lived from 1017 to 1073. He was kind of your earlier Buddhist, or not Buddhist, I'm sorry, Confucian scholar here. And Zhu Zi, who lived from 1130 to 1200. He's the statue there on the right. He's really the guy that we get a lot of the writings from and translations that give us a little insight to Neo-Confucianism. So what are some of the core ideas? First and foremost was the reality of all things that you'll see with both Buddhism and Taoism and other religions. They kind of look at the impermanence of the world, and they look at like the physical world as not being a real and true kind of world. And Neo-Confucianists were having none of that. So you're seeing Confucianism as kind of dipping into the spiritual a little bit. We talked about it as a secular philosophy before, but now they're getting into this idea. Very anti-meditation, like they're not a big fan of it. You don't need it. The key thing here is human nature, okay? And that is this idea of Li, which interestingly enough is kind of like the Tao, that in general, human nature is good, okay? But if you want a good Li, you have to work at it, because our emotions, decisions that we make ourselves, material goods, all of those things were known as often as the key, could impact our Li, could prevent us from being our best person, could prevent us from being good. They're really not a big fan of, let's get rid of that. They're not a big fan of religious ideas like heaven and hell and karma and all that type of stuff, and they actually write actively against those things. And of course, a lot of what they write is, these guys write, is the upholding of filial piety. And that is really, really important in China. That's part of kind of going back to the 5 key relationships in Confucianism. And so in a way, we're bringing in some new ideas, like the first kind of 4 ideas that I have on the top. And then the ones on the bottom are just to kind of like validate what we were doing before in Confucianism. All right. Now, these ideas of Confucianism were as a result of the spread of Buddhism. Okay, now Buddhism first comes into China around 213 BCE, part of, all that stuff that Ashoka was trying to do to spread it. An important guy who is actually pictured here is An Shigao, who was a Parthian prince who was a devout Buddhist and also started to translate a lot of Buddhist works into different languages so more people could be exposed to it. From the 200s to the 500s CE, it really starts to grow. And a guy that's really important for Chinese history is Lokaksima, who is credited with kind of being the man that translates and develops the core ideas of Mahayana Buddhism, which I'll show you how to spell that in a moment, which will become the key Buddhism that is used in China. So what is Mahayana Buddhism that Lokaksima gave us? So you have this idea of the Buddha Shakyamuni. Keep it simple. The Buddha is divine. The Buddha is a divine being, okay? He's not just a regular guy or a prince, and because he was a prince that achieved enlightenment, that he actually is divine. And in many ways, we are going to worship him as well. The other key difference here from Theravada Buddhism, which I'm going to talk about more in a moment, is the concept of the bodhisattva. A bodhisattva is one who is seeking enlightenment and is close or wants to be at that enlightened stage. But that can be anyone. These aren't like monks and nuns, or these aren't people who are ascetics or whatever. It could be quite literally anyone. They are seen as model beings. These are people who we should emulate. These are people who help us. In many cases, they are lay people. Again, as I mentioned, they're not monks or nuns. They're just regular people. The key thing they do is they follow the 6 Paramitas, which I'll talk about that in a moment. And the key thing about bodhisattvas is bodhisattvas are people who actually could be released from this world. They are people who could easily have obtained nirvana, but choose not to. They want to delay their ascension because they are here to help others. And so kind of like public service is a big part of Mahayana Buddhism. Now, the main scriptural writings here are the Prajna Paramita Sutras, which are a collection of writings that have the 6 key paramitas: Dana, Siya, Kasanti, Virya, Jhana, and Prajna. I'm not going to go into each one of them. These are just the core ideas. These are the ideas that kind of guide your daily practice. Lots of meditation, lots of focus in what people are supposed to do. And some last things about Mahayana that becomes really popular. Again, the worship and going to places at stupas, that temples are built in stupa manner. Here's an example of the Songyu Pagoda, which is a very popular place within China to go. They also believe in samsara, rebirth, and nirvana. None of that is different. But the focus here is more on the quest to attain nirvana and then the knowledge that one gains, okay, rather than actually achieving nirvana. If you get there, hey, that's cool. But the idea is the journey and the people that you help, the people that you interact with, as well, of course, as the worshiping of the Buddha are things that make this Mahayana Buddhism very different, but made it really, really popular in China. Now, that is not to be to be confused with Theravada Buddhism, which becomes more popular in Southeast Asia. All right, this is closer to the original. And I say Southeast Asia, places like modern-day Myanmar, Cambodia, Laos, Sri Lanka, Thailand, Indonesia. Thailand is actually the main religion there, but as well as parts of southern China. So that's why I kind of bring it in here. I'm going to be talking about Buddhism actively when I do my videos on Southeast Asia for this particular time period, but like understand that it's still there. This is probably closest to the Buddhism in India. This is mainly advocated by a bodhisattva who wrote some stuff down and was a teacher, Maitreya. And the focus here is that your goal is to achieve enlightenment before helping people. So that's the most important thing, is a lot of people think like, hey, you achieve enlightenment in Buddhism and then your like soul ascends and just leaves. It doesn't, okay? You're still going to be alive, and the Buddha didn't die right away. I mean, the Buddha lived till he was like 84 or something like that. You can check the age. I'm probably wrong, but just a guess. But I'm going to go with 84. But you achieve it, and then that's when you help others and you get involved in teaching others the way to that enlightenment. Meditation, of course, is huge, and you're doing this every day. It's very, very important. This is how you come to understand yourself more. Big monastic tradition. They have a strong relationship with lay people, but monks are a separate group to themselves, and the monks are very important. They help others. They do lead secluded and very simple lives where it's basically them and their daily practice, their meditation, and what they do to sustain themselves. So very limited goods, I'm just blanking on a word. But hey, that's okay. They don't want a lot of stuff. We'll call them kind of minimalists, if you will. And they're very big on like reading original scriptures, kind of the first things that were written down, particularly in the Pali language. All right, and we are upholding the previous beliefs, okay? The middle way, the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, karma and samsara, all those things that were covered in my Buddhism videos, okay? Nirvana, all that type of stuff. Buddha is not divine, nor were his words or speeches transcendent, okay? So we need to understand this. Another thing is insight. It can happen suddenly. Whereas in Mahayana, I had prajna was this intuitive insight, like you're working at it, and then you're slowly arriving at it. In Theravada Buddhism, because that was the idea of the Buddha, he was under the Bodhi tree, and he's like searching, and it's like wham, it hits him. And so you can have that. All right, and so that's important to understand. Focus on the present moment, okay? Right now. Mahayana Buddhism does, because they focus on the journey, they tend to forecast a little bit. They tend to, when they look at their meditations and some of the stuff that they're trying to achieve, it's a little bit more in the future. Whereas in this particular case, Theravada Buddhism, it's we are living in the right now and understanding this moment now. And death to rebirth is immediate. Okay, some of the other schools, like what I'll talk about in Tibetan Buddhism, believe that there's a lag time from when you die to when you're reborn. In Theravada Buddhism, right away, here we go. So we got Mahayana, Theravada, and now we're going to get into Tibetan Buddhism, or what is often referred to as the Vajrayana School, which developed in the 7th century. This is a little bit of a mix of both. It kind of forms out of Mahayana Buddhism, but it does have its own twist. So they do things like, they do believe in the core beliefs like the Four Noble Truths, samsara, also that, but then they also bring in the 6 Paramitas. And the key goal is for you and your soul to kind of be liberated from all world vices and hindrances. That's what we want. The picture there on the right are a collection of Tibetan monks. Now, they believe achieving Buddhahood is more common than people think, okay? And that it's actually commonly achieved. That nirvana for them is a state of continuous bliss, while all at the same time a cognition of emptiness, that you need nothing. Sounds pretty good. You need nothing and you are happy, that you've understood yourself, you understand the universe. It's a pretty good situation. And based on the life and travels of the Buddha, is that you're helping others. Buddha, and the stories of Buddha, he would spontaneously and continuously perform activities to help all other people and sentient beings, and that's something that you should do. And the way that you get there is through a couple different areas, and one is called the Bodhisattva path. The Bodhisattva path is a 5-step path to the ultimate realization of nirvana. You accumulate knowledge and wisdom, and it slowly leads to a calming, and then you become aware of the emptiness and meditation, and through meditation. In many cases of that, you are going to go into the path of being a monk or a nun. All right. The Lamrim path is a path of realization for lay people and those who do not follow the journey of the Bodhisattvas. This takes longer. This takes years. Okay. But in Tibet, a big focus on spreading the word of the Buddha, and that's where you get the lamas or teachers, not to be confused with the Dalai Lama, which I'll explain later. It's really, really important. And here is a Tibetan temple that you see below. Now, what's interesting thing about Tibet is that many of the gods and spirits of religions that predated Buddhism are kind of brought into it. So you have some positive gods and negative gods, if you will, that are actually kind of either trying to help you or pull you away from following your path. They're very big on visual aids to help people with worship and structure, things like pictures, structures, public prayers, wheels, flags, all sorts of stuff that help you get focus. They have lots of different rituals. There are things that lay people do, there are things that monks do, and they're very, very different. So depending on where you're at is the rituals that you will do. They believe in something called the bardo, which is the state of being between death and rebirth. This can last up to 49 days, and the soul is guided by the lamas who read prayers and perform rituals from the Book of the Dead, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which is really one of their main scriptures, so that they can break attachment from the old life and be reborn. So when you die, you need a little help in getting yourself back. The leader, however, is known as the Dalai Lama. The first one that they go back to is a man by the name of Gaiden Drupa. That's on the far left. The main one, however, was Sonam Gyatso, who is the man in the middle. He was the first one to be named the Dalai Lama while living. He was identified by the monks. They have a very specific ceremony in which they identify this. Interestingly enough, he actually journeyed to and is responsible for converting Mongols. Not a bad trick. And the current leader is Tenzin Gyatso, who is the 14th reincarnation of the Dalai Lama. When he dies, it doesn't mean that there's a new one. It only happens if the signs are correct. All right. So there are some ideas of the different religions that were going on in the China area at this time. Hope that gives you a good sense, and we will talk more soon. Take care, guys.